good morning and welcome to Rising. I'm joining you here from Vermont. Emily is in Washington, D.C. Emily, how's the weather down there? It's a morning show. You got to kick it off by talking about the weather. That's what we do.
It's not Vermont, I'll tell you that. It's not quite as nice as what I'm sure you have going on up there.
It's lovely up here despite Joe Manchin's best efforts to destroy the earth. So a little later today, we're going to talk
lovely
about...
for now.
Yes, for now. Yeah. We'll see. Yeah, we'll see. A big scoop from my colleague Ken Klippenstein. We'll talk about that a little bit later. We'll talk about the 10-year-old rape victim. We're going to talk about that later in the show. We're going to have on Brandy Calvert, who is a Kansas pro-choice activist who I profiled back in 2017 because she got involved in politics really only because Trump won, and she's kind of the flip side of that movement. She'll be on later to talk about this amendment to ban abortion in Kansas. We're going to have Sam Golding on, who's a GOP lobbyist who wrote an interesting memo to clients this week, warning them that if they were engaging in any wokeness, the House Republicans were going to come for them once they tackle the House majority. What else we got?
Well, we also have locomotive engineer and former Iowa State Representative Jeff Kurtz and editor-in-chief of the Real News Network, Max Alvarez, on the show today, and then journalist at Mint Press News, Dan Cohen, is joining us. So we're pretty packed, but we're also covering, I think, a lot of things the media is missing. So I'm excited for that, Ryan. And you are particularly excited, as you just previewed earlier in our opening here, to dig into the news that was broke by the Washington Post just last night by Jeff Stein and his colleague, that Joe Manchin isn't interested in supporting a new package. Ryan, tell us what happened.
Right. So after he pulled out of Build Back Better in December and said he was done, you went from this kind of minute-to-minute incremental coverage of the ins and outs to basically a blackout as the negotiations took place directly between Schumer and Manchin and the White House and Manchin, hoping that they could piece back together something that Manchin kept laying out. He was laying out exactly what he said he would do. He wanted higher taxes on the richest people and on the biggest corporations, rolling back a little bit of the Trump tax cuts. He wanted half of that to go toward deficit reduction and other kind of inflation fighting measures. He also wanted to fight inflation by investing in clean energy and in dirty energy. He wanted to make sure that it was across the board. You put more government money into energy prices can come down. And he was going to pay for a lot of that by another deflationary measure, which was going to allow Medicare to negotiate for prescription drug prices. So that was the contours of the package that Manchin said he was okay with. Manchin was lying. I don't think he was ever okay with this, or he just doesn't know what he's okay with. So last night he said, actually, all of these things that I've agreed to in detail, because Ron Wyden, head of the Finance Committee, said the climate sections had been nailed down, like back and forth with Manchin, like they had agreed to what they had agreed to. He says, actually, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to support any tax cut, any tax hikes on anybody, the richest of the rich, or any corporate tax hikes. And I'm not going to do any climate or energy spending. The only things I will do are allow Medicare to negotiate for lower prices for a few drugs. People are going to be furious when they find out how few it is. It might end up being just a couple dozen. And we're going to use some of those savings for deficit reduction and to extend subsidies for Obamacare that are about to expire. So if you're in this category of a couple million people who are about to see premium increases on Obamacare, your premiums would stay the same. And if you're somebody who pays too much for prescription drugs, maybe at some point in the future, if your drug is on the list, you might get a slight discount for that. So that's where Manchin is now.
Yeah, and I continue to think that Manchin is taking arrows for other members of the Senate that might not have vocalized how difficult this vote would be for them, but it ultimately would be more difficult for them than they've admitted or conceded in negotiations. They're negotiating specifically with Manchin in the same way that with the tax bill, it was like, we specifically have to bring Manchin in, we specifically have to bring Sinema into these conversations, which is how the whole Manchinema type, the legend was born. But I wonder, Ryan, how true you think that is from your sort of sourcing and your pulse, your finger on the pulse of the Democratic Party on Capitol Hill. Would this be a tough vote for anybody else? I mean, in a year ago, I think is very different than right now because inflation, the consumer price index just spiked 9.1%. That is the biggest spike since 1981, 40 years. That makes, whether you think this makes that worse, and I think it would, but whether or not you agree with that, it definitely makes the vote more difficult, I would think. Obviously, on the flip side, it's a midterm year, and Democrats seem to believe this is the thing they need to hold up and say, we can still do things, we can still legislate, we can still govern, we still have the will to govern and make things better. But in this inflationary environment, I'm wondering if you think that it really is just Manchin.
I think on the inflation question, it was just Manchin, and there's an irony there that around July 1st you started seeing, because of this Fed massive interest rate hike, you started seeing oil futures collapse. And you started seeing gas prices coming down all across the country. So in the 2 weeks after June 30th, that 9.1%, because energy is the main driver of this inflation right now, came way down. And so we're in this just absolutely absurd situation where a decision is being made in the middle of July based on a number that came out on June 30th, even though if they put in the 2 weeks since then, the number would be different and you wouldn't have the headlines like a 40-year thing. But I think it's only Manchin on the inflation question here because all of the spending here, which is only half of the package, the rest is deficit reduction, goes toward driving prices down, driving fossil fuel prices down and driving clean energy prices down. And by investing in clean energy over the long term, then you reduce the pressure of demand on fossil fuel prices so that long term you have lower energy prices. And so the idea that you would, as a people, as a society, look at gas prices and oil prices as high as they are and say, well, the thing that we need to do as a society is make sure that there is no competitor to these prices that are so high for us and are causing so much pain for us. We've got to just let this industry continue until it's sucked out every drop of oil from around the earth, and that's before we've even gotten to climate change. And I'm curious for your take on this because I can't quite get my head into a place where this is okay. Like the Hoover Dam has a couple years left before it perhaps is no longer functional because of the water level over there. Spain right now is over 105 degrees, and this heat wave is supposed to run across Europe, last for maybe a month, and go all the way to Croatia. India, it was over 120 degrees. There's what's called a flash drought here in the south and all the way up into New England. You have massive drought conditions over in the south. You've got a heat wave in Texas that is knocking the power grid out. So help me understand, because it is Manchin, but it's also Manchin plus 50 Republicans in the Senate who are like, you know what? I think we're good. I think this is okay. Like, how do you get there?
Well, and a couple things. I mean, so the first part of that, I would say inflation, talking about the long term of this from a political perspective, and I'm not arguing from a moral perspective, just from the perspective of politicians like Joe Manchin.
Right, that's what I'm curious about.
Yeah. Who would say, like, why would I in the short term want to take a vote on something that our constituents are going to be told is raising the prices of consumer goods, government spending, brings up other prices, and maybe if it's not just energy, it's going to go into other places, and then the Democratic Party gets blamed for it, higher prices, and that's the blame has been shifted to us, and pretty squarely, because we all took a vote on this piece of legislation. On the other question, I think everything you just outlined is sort of, first of all, Texas and California to some extent, when there are these sort of cronyist, sloppy shifts to new energy, I think that scares off a lot of Republicans until they realize that there might be profit to be made from it. Then you sometimes see them get on board with these things. Remember, John Boehner is now lobbying on behalf of the marijuana industry, but that's just one example. But secondly, also the vast scope of everything you just outlined is why I think a piece of legislation like this, was it whittled down to like $1 trillion in spending, this one that they're working with?
Yeah, it would have been, right, and it would have been about $550 billion in climate, which though gets multiplied because there's so much clean tech investment in the private sector that just needs a little bit of boost so that they can have some certainty that, okay, we're not going to die in the first year here. We need some we need these tax credits to last like 5 years, 10 years, whatever it's going to be, so that we can take some risks that might actually pay off. So it's 500 billion, but the way that the system works, that could end up being several trillion.
Yeah, I think so. Ron Wyden's statement said that this is our last chance to prevent the most catastrophic and costly effects of climate change. That's a perspective on this that I don't understand because of exactly everything you just laid out. The vast sort of global scope of this problem, the idea that this $1 trillion at most package from the United States Senate is the last chance to prevent the most catastrophic effects of climate change. I think the best chance is addressing this in India and China and continuing to do better here. There's no question about it. But I think the hesitance from Republicans and Democrats, like moderate Democrats like Manchin, is we can do as much as we want to here. We can make our people, suffer economically in the short term to some degree. We can try to mitigate that. But if we don't bring India and China substantially on board, and other countries as well, then it's all for naught, and we're going to get blamed for that too. So I think it's the vast global scope is actually part of that calculus, I think.
Well, China's well ahead of us when it comes to clean technology at this point, and is strategically kind of locking down the components for the renewable industry, both wind and solar, and we're just sitting back and allowing that to happen. So, looking at it country by country and kind of consumer by consumer goes back to the idea that, like, if we all just take personal responsibility, if we all just recycle, that this will work itself out. This is actually a global systemic problem, and there are two major leaders of the global system right now. Or there's a major leader, that is the United States. We are the global superpower, and there's a rising power in China. And so for the biggest dog, kind of in the yard, to say, well, we're not going to do anything until this poodle over here does something, like India. India can't afford to kind of turn around the world when it comes to climate change. But the United States is the one that really has to lead the way. And so I think what's unspoken about what Ron Wyden's prediction there is that they expect that they're going to lose either the House or the Senate or both. And then they don't have any sense of when they're going to get a path back. The last time they lost it in 1994, they didn't come back until 2006. And so by 12 years from now, the type of investment that would be needed to stave off apocalypse is nowhere near $550 billion. Like $550 billion multiplied through the private sector, potentially can have our emissions over the next decade. Like, that's, like, climate scientists and energy experts say that is a realistic possibility. And if that happens, and if then you have the kind of exponential technological improvements that come from that investment, you get a head start on it. Now, Manchin got to the Senate, if you remember, running an ad in 2010 where he took a rifle and put a bullet through the last attempt to deal with climate change. So this is something that Manchin has been, had his sights on, the entire time.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a whole lot of his voters, it's probably a really visceral issue too, and that speaks to whatever consultants came up with the ad that you're referring to, which is really something. Folks.
Yeah, and it all goes back to gas prices. They say if you try to address climate change, you're going to be paying $4 at the pump. Well, we didn't do anything about climate change in 2010, and congratulations, it's $5 and $6. So here, so it's it's kind of collective suicide, but the Senate is the Senate.
The Senate is the Senate. That we can definitely agree on. The Senate is the Senate. This looks like it's scuttled. I actually think maybe they'll work on something even smaller than this. We'll see, but it seems like you're right, Ryan. The Senate is going to Senate. Yeah,
and maybe they'll do something on prescription drug prices, right. And then when people find out what they're actually getting for that and how easily it's going to be gained by big pharma, there'll just be more rage out there.
There sure will. Well, we will have more Rising for you right after this.